Our next guest sees Lilly's weakness as a buying opportunity. Mizuho healthcare strategist Jared Holz joins us now. Jared, great to see you. Certainly it's had an enormous pullback. Do you buy their explanation of the inventory sort of fluctuations from quarter to quarter?
Great to see you, too. Yeah, I think I do. This is obviously a moving target in such a fluid market, and there are so many things we still don't understand about all of the supply-demand metrics in the market, which drugs are going to be preferred by patients and doctors, how long patients are going to stay on the drug, are they going to be on these chronically, intermittently? So, yeah, I think some of the supply commentary from the company makes a lot of sense. I just think there are so many variables that are just not yet understood.
Novo had a big pullback as well. Is there any concern in your mind that there is an issue with demand since, Novo just closed its deal with Catalent, so it's prepared to produce a lot more vials of the drug?
I don't think so. It comes up in every conversation, both professionally and personally, around this drug class and how pervasive it is and how many patients are going to either want it or need it or a combination of both. And Novo and Lilly have, I think, invested over $20 billion just this year in manufacturing. So I think we talk about this market as though it's much more mature than it is. But this is, 2024 was really the first year where both Lilly and Novo had approved drugs for obesity. I think we're just getting started. So I do think the demand is there. I think the one thing that gives me a little bit of pause is how long patients are going to be on the drug for.
Hey, Jared, as this gets approved for more and more things away from diabetes and obesity, do you expect insurance numbers to go higher or the amount of coverage, whether it's employers, that sort of thing? And I'm just curious, will that help demand? I would suspect it would.
Hey, Dan. Yeah, I think so. Sleep apnea, various cardiac conditions, and maybe even Alzheimer's disease as we get data for that later this year. If the efficacy is decent and the safety, I think, will most likely be very good, at least versus, the Biogen and Lilly drugs that are on the market. I would think that insurance is going to have to cover these for more medical conditions. So I think that's a definite. The question is when, and I think as we move forward here, we'll get more evidence of that.
There was a couple, I think it was last quarter, David Ricks didn't do a particularly good job explaining things during a conference call. I think he did a better job today. But when you're trading at the valuation it's trading at, you better have that story tight. Otherwise, this happens. So I think the average analyst price after today is still just north of $1,000. What's the case, though, Jared, if there is one, with this thing can break down in a meaningful way?
Yeah, what's going on? Yeah, I think the valuation is still the biggest constraint when you talk to investors about their willingness to own it. I think it's trading around 32 times the new 2025 estimates that are going to come out and north of 25 times 2026. Obviously that pales in comparison to where the stock traded last year at this time, but it's still much higher than most of the other pharma companies out there. Does it break down? I think you need to see a couple quarters where the numbers do not inflect higher. This quarter, Zepbound missed numbers, Mounjaro missed numbers. Again, we're talking about, a very small variance. But in order for the stock to break down from here, to answer the question, I think you need to see a couple of quarters where you really are starting to see evidence that the revenue is not meeting consensus.
Jared, do you think that they diversify away from the fat loss drugs and they go with another area, or do they gobble up the smaller players? I'm long a name Altimmune, which has dipped below $500 million market cap. This one seems to be under pressure, but the efficacy seems to be better than the larger players.
Yeah, it's a really good question. You've seen them diversify away over the past couple of quarters. They've done a couple of deals. They just announced yesterday a deal for a private company in the oncology space for about $2.5 billion, call it. Whether or not they can add to obesity or these cardiometabolic drugs is really just a question of overlap and how the government would look at that. I think as it applies to either an Altimmune, or a bunch of these other much smaller publicly traded companies, it's going to depend on mechanism of action, things that are just much more detailed insofar as how the government would look at it. But I think we'll see what the oral shows. I mean, that data is coming out really soon. If there's any abnormality or inconsistency with the oral drug or for glipron, then maybe they kind of have to dip their toe into another asset there.